Morning, everybody. Adrian Kelly here from DNA IT, Sales and Marketing Director of DNA IT. You're all very welcome to the threat intelligence session we're putting on this morning to this webinar. I hope you find the content interesting, and please do jump in at any stage if you have any questions in the chat. Raise your hand, or indeed you can take them offline and talk to us about it afterwards. I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Jason. As you all know, is our virtual CIO and Senior Technical Consultant in DNA. So Jason is going to join me for some of the session, and we're going to have a chat about the threat intelligence landscape. So if you have any questions, please do ping us. So just to get started and to recap, DNA have put a lot of time and energy over the last number of years into cybersecurity to the point where we've now achieved this Managed Security Service Provider of the Year award last year, the Tech Excellence Awards, and we maintain ISO 27001 as well. When we take all of this into context, we're looking at what exactly is what areas of the business need cybersecurity and what are we covering off and how it has changed. And again, put this slide up just to remind everybody there was a time in it this was a much simpler task when we were all in one building, and it was still hard enough to secure everything. Everywhere you see a green tick here, security is an issue, and now we have to comply with not just GDPR but NIS2 and DORA and many other things. So to kick us off, these are still very much true, and as global statistics, the years don't really change. 90% of all security incidents are still coming from users, most often with the clicking on a phishing malware email. And despite the years, and there's a lot of fluctuations in, as you'll see as the session goes through the next hour, there's things changing, there's trends, there's new habits, new threats, but this is still very much the same. 80% of all cyber incidents are being caused by usernames and passwords being compromised. That still very much holds true. Now, here's another one from a couple of years ago that's still holding true, except it's gotten even higher now. We're still seeing 650,000 new malware entities identified by cybersecurity. And when I'm doing this as an in-person session, I ask the audience to vote and guess, and most people get it wrong. It's every day. And the worst part about this is that it's a majority of this malware is what's known as zero day, and it's used once, never seen again. Therefore, the cybersecurity industry can't develop protection against these things because they've not been seen before. This is just taken from a snippet I saw only this morning from Tech Central's newsletter. A survey HPE have just done saying 2/3 of financial services firms in Ireland have been hit by a cyber breach in the last year. I have no insight into that data, but this is just something they published this morning. And again, they're saying that in SME sector, it was even higher at 67%. Now, where I've taken my data from for this session, I'll talk in a second, but just to remind everybody that we need to be clear about who it is we're actually talking about in terms of the threat landscape. So we've broken it into these sectors here. A lot of people still think that the threat landscape and the cyber criminals are being driven by people in this kind of category here, which is the kind of malicious geeks in their bedrooms, lone hobbyists and stuff. These guys are still absolutely there. And we still have people at the nation state level, which is, state sponsored cyber crime. Most of what we're dealing with, though, and the biggest reason why we have this explosion in cyber crime that we have had in recent years, and the reason it's not going to go anyway, is because most of it is coming from this category here of organized crime. It's big money business, and it has gone into being an actual industry now in itself. And as you'll see later on, this is now an actual industry that is inverted in insofar as it is an industry in all by itself. We still have a lot of so-called hacktivism going on, where you have this type of stuff with political causes and geopolitical crises throughout the world, that creating a huge amount of its own cyber warfare. But that's more cyber warfare than cyber crime, but it's debatable. So our trends tactics update for this year. The sources of our data, here's what we do. And this comes about because of our own ISO 27001 process where we have to do a threat intelligence research for ourselves so that we can ensure that our own processes and our own strategies are keeping ahead of the threats and that we're fully aligned to what's going on. So every year I go and I gather the data of these guys here. So the ENISA, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, I take their threat landscape update. IBM X-Force, which is a global view. I take Europol's latest report, Sophos, and in this instance, new to this year, a new vendor called Huntress that we've been working with recently, and I've taken their cyber threat report. Now, all this, these raw reports, I have them. You're free to have a look at them yourself after if you want to dig deeper into any of the data. But what we've done is we've taken the highlights and some of the key points of this data, and we're using that for the basis of our report this morning. Okay. So there's a lot in these guys. I'll whip through them fairly succinctly. So threats and availability, DDoS, ransomware at the top of the reporting for another period this year. So basically, your denial of service attacks and ransomware are still the top threats we see. A big thing in the last year or two has been the growth of this sector called living off trusted sites. And this is where threat actors are using legitimate cloud services and legitimate communication services to do their business so that they're hiding in plain sight, much harder to find them. And they're using a lot of these things for their own command and control. So it's much more difficult to find them. We see geopolitics, as I said, as a huge driver for now spilled over into actually malicious operations. In particular, in recent times, the war in Gaza and Ukraine, these kind of global crises have had a huge impact on the international cyber warfare. Business email compromise incidents, despite all the security that is being put in place, there's still a huge sharp increase in the last 12 months has been seen in email being compromised. And I'll discuss some of those ways it's been happening in a minute. Extortion has become a big thing by weaponizing disclosure requirements. So what we find is that there's a shift away somewhat from um, where phishing attacks were leading to malicious files, your files being encrypted, you have to pay a ransom to get them released. Now there's a lot more of stealing your data, stealing credentials, or threatening you that they have stolen your data and they're going to release it to the world if you don't pay them. They're moving away from the encryption side of it. Now, it's not to say the encryption piece has stopped, but we've seen that the extortion piece has really become a real growth. The ransomware attacks appear to have stabilized, but it's still very high. It's not getting any worse, but it is still very high. In terms of the AI piece, there's been a lot of speculation whether AI is having a big increase or not, or whether people are using AI, or to what extent, sorry about that, our AI is being seen out there. We have seen that they're basically taking public tools like ChatGPT and these types of things, and they are using their own versions of that. But what we have seen is very interesting. They're mostly using AI in an exploratory way. It's kind of early days trying to figure out how to make the most of it. And it's often for much more activities that we see like in the legitimate world where it's helping them to do mass marketing. They're helping them to do multi-language translations, help to put out more efficient scam emails and things like this. Um, it's still early days for AI adoption in cybercriminal land, and you should see later on, a lot of people in the cybercrime world are still unsure how to use AI. They're very much like everyone in the legitimate world. I think you'll be surprised at some of the findings we've come up with. Um, so yeah, key headline figures again, something like just short of 20,000 new vulnerabilities identified in the last 12 months. 9.3 of them falling into what's called a critical category, 21.8% categorized as high. Threatened, we see the info stealers. Yeah, this is a huge one where information stealing, as I mentioned, is one of the biggest trends that we see. Rather than trying to encrypt your data and do anything like that, they're just trying to steal it. 24% of all observed incidents now globally. So that's an enormous uptrend of a trend in that whole segment. The hacktivists overlapping their activities with state actors. Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of that going on. As I said, geopolitics is playing a huge role. A very worrying one has been a recent surge in mobile banking trojans. Um, And basically, this whole idea that mobile banking on your apps, everyone is doing it all the time, this has become an area of significant investment for criminals. And Europol, particularly, are seeing a lot more crime coming in via that. The malware as a service offerings absolutely is still very much there. I'm going to show you an example of how industrialized that's become now in a moment. Supply chain compromises through social engineering absolutely are becoming an increasingly growth area. And we see that a lot now in terms of what's going on. So within supply chains, the weaker links are identified and are under heavy attack. So larger companies become very, very mindful of that, and it has proven to be a very successful strategy for cyber gangs. The data compromise increased 23 to 24. Yeah, they feel that this has been fairly stable, but it's starting to go up again. So yeah, I think that just comes back to the growth in theft. Like I said, DDoS for higher attacks and large scale attacks by unskilled users is what we see a huge change in. So basically, if you can imagine before, in order to be a cyber criminal at this level and carrying out a denial of service attack, you had to be very skilled in coding and as an engineer in your own right, or you had to be a very skilled developer. What's happened now is it's become so industrialized that any unskilled criminals are getting in on the act and simply using tools that have already been built by other gangs. And so what you see now is we have yet another acronym. It's literally just being called crime as a service. So you'll see some of that example in a moment. This here, the threat of AI-enabled information manipulation has been observed, but it's still on a very limited scale. So while there are examples out there of some very scary, people's faces being emulated in videos, voices being captured and being recreated over the phone, it's still very much in its early days, and it's still kind of in an almost experimental phase. In the near term, the threat from AI-generated attacks is still relatively low, but we're absolutely certain it's going to grow, and we'll see why in a moment. This is just to give us an insight into the actual breakdown of analyzed incidents. Now it's going from mid 23 to mid 24 is the last data point that they've got. But if you look at it, it really stands up to statistics. Denial of service attacks making up 41%. Again, a lot of that coming back to where sort of geopolitical rows as well as cyber criminality overlap. Ransomware is still a huge piece of the mix, as you can see, at 25%. And then what they simply have as data incidents here. This is our data theft area that I talked about a minute ago. Our social engineering threats are huge. Malware is still not going anywhere. And then other miscellaneous threats you see down here. So it's supply chain, web threats, as they call them, 0 day. The sector is being targeted by number of incidents. Again, just a quick look at some of the big ones. Public admin, the whole public sector remains a huge, huge target. And you have to remember that cyber criminals go where the money is and where they're getting success. So always look at these statistics with that in mind, that when people are looking at this, they're going where the money is. When we look at over here, the next one down, funnily enough, I'm always surprised to see transport getting attacked so heavily. Banking and finance is the next one down. Business services, as they're called, which is very catch-all, but I guess we can imagine what that means. Digital infrastructure, general public. Interestingly, people down here, if you look at this pink one, ICT service management, the likes of this guy, that this is where we fit in, and MSPs and people like us. We're down to much smaller, like the chemical industry here, for example, is in the mix down here, but very, very low. So a lot of the utility space kind of much, much lower down. Um, and then we have a fairly general spread across. Manufacturing is still a big target over here. And media and entertainment, personally, I was quite surprised at how big that was. But again, remember, when you're looking at these statistics, they're going where the money is. Now, if we look at the threats per sector, again, you just have it broken down here, what they're actually getting out of them. In public admin, which is the biggest sector by far, data attacks, denial of service attacks, malware, and so on. And it's giving us a breakdown of each one just within it. Um, so yeah, denial of service has been very big. Then in other sectors here, for example, like if you look at business services, in the red zone here, ransomware is much, much larger. Um, and then in other areas like manufacturing and stuff. So it is interesting. It is vary per sector. Some of them are kind of even, and others are there's big skews in particular areas. Um, so just to remind everybody about ransomware as a service, it hasn't gone away. It has very much become a cash cow for the criminal gangs. And what we now have is a situation where, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's very much end user friendly. Now, this is a slide from a couple of years ago, and it's still there. It's all still around. Satan is an online malware as a service platform that you can use. You can sign up and get your own account. And as you see here, it gives you the terms of business. They keep 30% fee of the income and you pay them in Bitcoin. Um, Here is a little explanation for it. In this video, just going to show you very quickly how easy it is to set up an account with Satan if you're that way inclined. Okay, so you fill in your details, tell them what you want to do, and then, sorry, I just got past it there. Your account is set up, and away you go. Now, you do have another site here, for example, called Carmen. This is their dashboard. This is how you can see what's in your cart, how your performance is getting on, what you've earned. Um, we have another view of this crowd here, Nemesis, another ransomware platform. You see fraud and finance is their business. This is their support desk. So, you're running a trial version of the service. You can try it out first to see do you like it or not, and then you can
Very
buy
professional.
and it's extremely fresh and user friendly. And you can see they've made it very easy for you to get involved. This is particularly thoughtful of them. They will try and respond to your ticket query within 24 to 48 hours. Please don't create multiple tickets. So they have the same headaches as a legitimate business does with their support desk. They have to hire engineers. They've the same. This is an industry in its own right, simply on the dark side. So when you see a service like that, all you need is to go onto the dark web and be prepared to use any form of Bitcoin or crypto. That site like Bitcoin mostly. Bitcoin is still their preferred currency. Funnily enough, they're very loyal to Bitcoin as opposed to any other cryptocurrency. Um, you will find as we go along that it's interesting. The cyber criminal world is becoming, as I said, an industry in its own right, with the same problems and a lot of the same challenges as the legitimate industry does. So some of the main threats as we move on then is, like I said, business email compromise, romance fraud. Actually, one of the most common types of cyber-enabled fraud schemes we're seeing across the entire EU, and phishing hasn't gone anywhere. Nobody likes to talk about romance fraud much, and we mightn't feel it affects us all that often in the business world. But it's interesting from Interpol's perspective. It's an enormous and growing area of cybercrime. So threat intelligence, when we look at the main threats again, digital skimming. Again, this is all about stealing data, misusing credit card data, trying to get your credentials. This is an interesting one. They have had some spectacular successes in targeting and breaking down large criminal gangs. But sadly, as always is the way, one lot goes to jail or gets shut down, they break up and they go somewhere else. So it's an ongoing crisis. But some of the big gangs were brought down, but it doesn't ever really stop the issue. Um, they are using AI and machine learning, and it's mostly developing into this new acronym, like I said, crime as a service, like I just showed you there with the mature ransomware platforms. Um, yeah, they're using legitimate tools as well. So they are using they're trying to develop, I suppose, their own version of it, but they're just using legitimate tools as well. KI of cases, yeah, AI assisted, AI altered, AI generated. They are seeing them and they're expected AI tools and deep fakes. Like they are out there, but a lot of it, as I said, is in its infancy. There's been a couple of spectacular cases where we've seen voice emulation being used. There's been one incident where a whole team of people had their faces copied, their voices copied, and the criminals were able to recreate a whole Teams call involving a team within a business to approve decisions that were being made around moving money. But it's very much in its infancy. But it is a warning that whereas in the past we've had to put in processes that relying heavily on telephone verification, for example, we are going to have to move into other areas around that as well. It won't be enough soon because it will not be hard for them soon to have a copy of your voice from your voicemail recording or something like that, and be able to make you speak any language or make you say any words, and reproduce how you call people. So it's not going to be as simple as it used to be in that sense. Um, Unfortunately, the number of criminals coming into cybercrime is growing because the barrier to entry has fallen. Like I said, it used to be something that you had to be a sophisticated developer type, and be malicious, whereas now every Tom, Dick, and Harry can just get involved, and you don't have to have any skills, and you can still now increasingly just get involved in making money out of cybercriminality. There is the lone actors, there's the networks. It's very diverse and wide ranging. We're seeing a lot in the EU targeting the EU, but we are also seeing a lot of people targeting now from abroad. Um, an interesting one you'll see shortly is that now we even see one in particular country getting involved in cybercrime simply as a revenue generating exercise. Yeah, the high level affiliates developers, absolutely, they're still there. The guys making the sophisticated platforms, they're like become the tech giants within the cybercrime world. They're nearly down into having branding wars at this stage. There are literally millions of victims across the EU and people being attacked every day. It's on the scale of that size, big and small. The e-merchants, the banks, institutions are still absolutely getting hammered on digital skimming. Um, we're seeing that users are still falling to victim to phishing despite all that we've done. It's kind of leveled off, but it's still absolutely a huge issue. It still keeps happening. This is a very troubling one, and again, it's not something that in the business world we think about or talk about too much. But if we look at the overall picture of what's going on in cybercrime, what's happening across the big picture, this is an enormous and sadly growth area. This is growing every year, targeting children. Um, Ransomware groups are increasingly targeting small and medium-sized businesses because they have lower cyber defenses, and that's, as I said at the outset, that's where they're making their money. The multi-layered extortion model is increasingly common. The trade in personal data, absolutely, it's out there now. It's interesting. They have been so successful with stealing personal data, it has actually led to another outcome, which you'll see shortly is probably quite surprising. The dark web is obviously still where it's all happening, but like I said, it is interesting that the dark web is evolving as well. That we see a shorter life cycle in gangs and in criminal sites because they're kind of like popping up, doing their work for a while, and then leaving, while other ones do seem to be staying around for a long haul. Most of them are moving into shorter life cycles. The Tor network is still the most popular platform to get onto the dark web. Cryptocurrencies is still the dominant sort of way of paying, and Bitcoin is still the currency most abused. Others are getting a look in as well, but um, there's a whole industry now in terms of underground banking for laundering crypto assets as well. They're seeing quite a lot of that. We're even seeing cryptocurrency debit cards and criminal use of swapping services. Cybercriminal are abusing a legitimate end-to-end messaging applications. Yeah, like I said, they're using a lot of legitimate services to carry about their business um, as an enabler. Info stealers are nearly a quarter of all observed incidents. Again, like I said, it's all about stealing your information because what they're learning is it's much easier to break into a system if I have your username, your password, and if I got through to your authentication device and I have stolen your authentication tokens, then I can get into everything you can get into, and I can just walk in the front door rather than trying to break in and do traditional hacking into the network. So it's much easier to steal your information. It's like if you have a very sophisticated car, and indeed most cars are now, it's much easier to break into your house and steal your keys than steal your car. It's just much simpler and much easier to do that. Malicious scripts, close to 22% of incidents. Again, that's just another one of those things that it's always a danger of people trying to inject you with a script because it's going to carry on a process you're not aware of. So a script executing when you've inadvertently clicked on something on a link. Attackers are not only refining their techniques but doubling down on approaches that yield the most success. So, like I said, it's a question of what's the cash cow here? What's bringing them in money is stealing information, selling it on the dark web, and your extortion, your ransomware. These are the cash cows of the industry. So hunters did a year-long analysis to track changes and fluctuations in types and techniques and trying to understand how different methodologies are happening and what attackers are doing that might be different. And again, the bottom line is their findings come back with there's a need for proactive defenses, adaptive strategies. But it was very interesting just to see. Now, this is just from Huntress's perspective as one vendor, but it was still gives us a very good indication of what they're seeing because it is a global view. So it would represent the same thing, and it agrees with the big picture data we see from the other sources that information stealing is a huge and the leading vector. We have the malicious scripts I just mentioned a minute ago, and malware is still very much a player. And you see, as we work our way down, these things haven't gone away either. But an interesting one that we're seeing more of is this idea here of remote RMM abuse, or remote monitoring, remote access tools getting attacked. So that's an interesting one and a sobering one for anyone in the IT services sector because MSPs and other IT companies, anyone who's access to someone else's network, are also increasingly being attacked. The industry is being targeted. We're seeing the technology industry itself getting targeted a lot. Healthcare is enormous. Interestingly, now hunters have found the education sector being very heavily hit. Again, this is just reflecting their view of the world. But still, it goes to show that's what they see as being that's where the guys are making their money. Proliferation of remote access Trojans. Over three-quarters of remote access incidents involving these Trojans. Um, these are particular tools that they're using at the moment. This is more for the technical audience. Um, but it's an interesting one to see. This is another area that's seen a growth in the last 12 months. So everything you're seeing here has either gone up in the last 12 months or come down or stabilized. And any of these things is gone up in the last while. Focus on data theft and extortion, like I said, over encryption. These groups here, some of the names, they don't mean anything to me or you probably, but these groups are very well known in cybercrime land. These are very famous, like little businesses now. And these guys are going after businesses with high affiliate payouts. Um, once one gang has a successful score in one company or something around that, they all pile in to see can they get more out of it because they know it's going to take that company quite a while to get its cybersecurity into a sufficient place. So it's quite interesting at times how they share information. We have seen cases where Sophos, particularly in their report, talk about a case where one company got attacked and successfully ransomwared three times by one gang, and then shortly after another gang came in and had a go and they also had a successful score. And it's quite unbelievable, but it's happened because the business could not get back on their feet and were struggling so much to put in adequate defenses and figure out how the attacks were happening in the first place. So one gang found out from another one and they all went after them and they all had a successful score. Quite worrying when you think of it in those terms. There is evidence of groups of gangs cooperating from time to time. So the shift in the strategies, yeah, I said time will tell if they move more into extortion or double extortion schemes, but they are finding that extortion has proven to be a good one in recent times. Um, Data loss prevention services hardly made any advances and are often only installed. Yeah, here's the big one. We're all going to have to look at data loss prevention a lot more as our next wave of cybersecurity. So as we see, and those of you who you'll have spoken to us, and we've tried to improve every client's security dramatically over the last few years. Unfortunately, there's always more because the gangs are always evolving and coming up with new ways to try and get in and trying to defeat our defenses. Now, traditionally, data loss prevention software has been used by only, again, very kind of niche examples in larger enterprises and usually deployed in small scale to small teams. This is often complex or expensive. Um, that landscape is going to change over the next couple of years quite a lot as well. It's going to become much more prevalent. We're going to have to get clients to look at data loss prevention a lot more and how do we prevent theft from both inside the business as well as people coming from outside. Um, the gangs are well aware that very few companies have proper data loss prevention in place. And again, stealing it is one of their main objectives. The remote monitoring and management tools I mentioned there, these RMS tools, well established things like ConnectWise, Screen Connect, TeamViewer, all of these things. Um, these are trusted applications that everybody uses to access systems around the world. So again, that's something we have seen attacks on, and we have to be extremely mindful to fight against that and prevent that happening. The QR code phishing is a new one. That's had a bit of a surge in the last while. Image-based content, brand impersonation. We're going to see a lot of that now, and we've seen quite a growth in it in the last 12 months. And I'll show you some of the brands that are most impersonated. These methods likely attempt more secondary device targeting, scanning with phones. Yeah, we have seen people scanning QR codes, innocently thinking it's a marketing promotion or whatever it is, and what they've done without realizing it is triggered a download of malware onto their phone. Now, as someone who works in marketing all my life, it's extremely annoying to think of things like that happening because you want customers and clients to interact with QR codes for all kinds of reasons, all fun things, all good things usually. And of course, now the criminal gangs have decided to get in on the act. So it's another thing that we have to be careful about. Um, Malicious frameworks being successfully developed require attacker. Yeah, again, this is kind of the social media crawling, finds systems to determine the user's interest and delivers a custom feedback. This is one of the things about having your social media privacy settings on and check that they are actually on the way you think they are, because we are seeing more and more of that people's social media profiles are being used to generate a picture, and then you're going to get a phishing attack sent to you, or a dubious social media post sent to you that looks like it's targeting your interests. And again, it's actually the beginning of a cyber attack. Now, e-signature impersonation. This is a big one, and it really grew over the last year. Documents that look like they come from DocuSign, particularly, or Adobe, most prevalent form of phishing targeting customers in 2024. Um, Quite a big change here. The first is attackers fake graphical emails that look exactly like they come from the e-signature provider. No, if we are in our case, for example, our email gateway software, our FuseMail, will pick up most of this stuff, but this is the ongoing war. They're trying to make it so that it's so clean looking that the email scanners will miss it. The email scanner software is constantly trying to be updated to make sure it doesn't, but it looks extremely legitimate. And I'll show you now in a second some very good examples of that. This was where the actual service provider to host malicious document, or a document linking to a malicious website. So again, you're going to get something to sign that looks completely legitimate. When you click on it, you're going to sign something that's actually hosted on a fake site. Now then, here it is, for example, millions of documents all around the world are being signed with DocuSign all the time. This is an example of a fake DocuSign that was sent to somebody to review and sign and do your normal thing. And as you can see, it looks exactly like a real DocuSign. You'll never know unless you're extremely careful of where thing is coming from. Now, bearing in mind, if you're someone in your supply chain has had their email compromised and you have an attacker sitting in their email using their actual legitimate email to send you what is a fake DocuSign, it's going to be extremely hard for you to catch that. So, impersonated brands, the Microsoft brand, Microsoft 365 being ubiquitous in the world as it is, by far and away the most impersonated brand. However, look how big DocuSign is behind it. We were all now personally quite shocked to see how big DocuSign was getting emulated behind that. Um, this is a big category, and we'd want to dig into that more generic. But then all the other ones, we were also seeing an increased growth in attacks coming through from fake DocuSign, ShareFile, Adobe, and various others. Notable phishing email themes. E-signature impersonation. Again, we're at 28%. Voicemail lures, the one I touched on earlier on. This is just in its infancy, but the analysts are expecting this to become a lot bigger in the future. Because I said, once they have your copy of your voice speaking, I saw myself demonstrated at a conference last year, a guy giving an opening to the conference on a big screen, and he was an Englishman, and he spoke in perfect Irish for about 3 minutes of an introduction. And when he was finished speaking, at the end, he comes out and he's an Englishman. He doesn't speak a word of Irish, but we've just seen a video of him speaking Irish for 3 minutes. And the only thing that would give it away slightly in that instance was the lip sync was slightly out of touch because it was a video, and if you look extremely carefully, but you'd want to be looking very carefully. Now, that was speaking Irish, but we could have had him speaking English, saying anything we wanted him to say. We could have had him speaking any language you like. Now you take that and you put it into a voice only context where you can't see any lip sync issues or anything like that. You see how easy it is to be deceived. So it was used as a demonstration for how powerful emulation software is getting, and AI in the wrong hands, what it might be able to do. Creates a lot of possibilities. So yeah, we're seeing voicemail lures become a thing. And in this instance where you have people sort of overriding the approval processes that are there. So we typically set an example to people to say, if you get an email instructing you to change the invoice details on an invoice or to pay something quickly or to make some change to it, the process is usually call the finance manager or the CEO or whoever it is to get verification that that was really them sending you that email. And that's a practice we've encouraged people to do for years. It's still a great thing to do. What they're trying to do here is preempt that by saying you'll get a phone call. I need you to pay something fast, or it might just be left on your phone as a voicemail. Hi, I've sent you an email. Will you pay that quickly, straight away? I need it done now. And then it is that person's voice. So if you're on the other end of the phone, what are the likelihood that you're going to go and double check that it was, you know? So this is what they're hoping for. So something to watch out for the future. We can't trust voice anymore. Um, Image-based content, like I said, creating, you can't believe what you see in terms of just simple stuff from photo manipulation to faces or other things. Here's our QR codes rising. Our fake threads, reply chains, they're very small, but they're still there. The living off the trusted sites, like I said, is where it is a legitimate site, but it's been hijacked with illegitimate content, which is quite worrying at times. Now, the remote access methods. Again, this is just more kind of on the technical side of it. Here's our remote access Trojans. They're quite large. It's still the biggest piece by far, and we're seeing some more growth in that space. That's more for technical detail. Now, when it comes to AI specifically, there's been a lot of fear, a lot of speculation as to how AI might affect all of this, and we're all wondering. And with the hype being what it is around AI, everyone is quite unsure what to expect. So Sophos X, their cyber team, spent a lot of time specifically trying to understand this. And what they did was they've sat in and spied on many, many dark web forums over the course of the year and several months of last year, most of the year, in fact, um, trying to see what are these guys talking about and understand how they're using AI. So what they've come up with is interesting, to say the least. They have noticed a lot of innovation and some people very kind of dreaming big in the future, but there's also a lot of guys quite skeptical about this. So the cybercriminal state-sponsored threat actors have been conducting global phishing and spam campaigns, but the near-term threat from AI-generated attacks is monetarily low. That is the overall final statement on it as far as what we know right now. That's what the data is showing. And all the data sources say the same thing on that. However, everyone is also saying this, that they are starting to use AI to carry out cloud attacks. IBM's talking about it at one sort of level here, looking at prompts, phishing campaigns. They're just pointing out that they'll be able to do more with much shorter time frames because they're going to use AI to increase the volume. And they'll use AI for things like we said, voice emulation and photo manipulation and all those things, video manipulation. These particular gang observed an extremely active malware distributor leveraging large language models. They've found this particular gang is already ahead of the curve using large language models, using just to develop scripts and helping them to develop phishing emails. Um, it comes down to trying to help improve authenticity, particularly things that they were always very poor at, like language translation. It was always very easy to spot a lot of phishing emails or text SMS based phishing because it's often the language is very poor. An awful lot of the social engineering stuff that comes in and a lot of the attacks around Facebook and other social platforms, the poor language translation is letting it down. Um, they're going to use AI to help fix a lot of that stuff, which is again a good thing from their perspective, but something we have to be seriously nervous about and aware of on our side. Um, they also recognize, however, they have a lot of the same issues everybody else does. That complexity, they're trying to figure out how to use AI in what sense and whether it's worth your while or not. The AI market's maturing and becoming more integrated everywhere, but from our perspective, everybody in the legitimate world is figuring out how to use AI platforms safely. So whether that's Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, are the two big players everyone's hearing about. In other sectors and in larger industry contexts, you have things like IBM Watson X being the market leader at industrial scale AI. Now, everyone is thinking, well, now that opens up a new attack vector into your business as well. Um, so one of the things we're trying to encourage everyone to do is develop, and we're doing it ourselves. We're going to be rolling it out to all of our clients soon. Is you need an AI use policy within your ISMS, within your governance pack. Like I said, DNA are implementing our own. It's one of the recommendations from my research into the market, into threat intelligence at the moment. It's one of the strongest recommendations from IBM and most of the other vendors. Everybody is going to have to look at how we allow AI into our business, how we allow users to use AI platforms, because again, they are open to being attacked as well. So, no, sorry there, my apologies. That just dropped off for some reason. Oh, thank you, PowerPoint.
Nice background.
That is just as well. It was a pretty background. I have no idea what happened there, everybody. So thanks for that PowerPoint. I appreciate it. Um, I wasn't even slagging off Microsoft at the time, and there you go. So, okay, sorry about that. Let me just enable this. I have no idea what happened there at all. I think it got scared. Uh, Let me see. Where are we? Now we're way
Maybe
down
to
the
take a
content
break.
chart. Yeah, maybe it had enough. Maybe it's saying leave it at that, Adrian. You've made your point. Right. Sorry guys. It's not going to let me do this the easy way. Here. It shouldn't it? Let me just bounce through this really quick. Sorry now about this. Uh, Like I said, guys, if you have any questions at all, please ping them off in the chat or at least make note of it and we can have a chat offline, or I'll have a follow-up call with you later on with Jason or something we can chat next week. But as you can see, the purpose of this isn't to be just like scaring people. It really is a question of trying to make people aware that it's very important to everyone to understand that this is an industry in itself now. And despite all the security we have put into place, it has to stay, it has to grow. It's going to keep evolving. I had this conversation with a finance director of one of our clients recently that unfortunately there's never going to be a question where we can say to a client, that's kind of it for now, and we don't have to come back and think about security again for another few years, or it'll be years before we need to relook at this. It just isn't like that. It's moving too fast, it's too dynamic. Um, every single year, there's going to be something we need to probably look at and talk about. Now, it might not be a big significant investment or anything like that, it's probably not, but there is going to be something gradually small every year we have to do. Um, this is where IBM's coming down, and this is where the report, as far as I can think, yeah, this is where IBM are coming back on their report, the IBM X Force. Their view is that when single generative AI technology gets to about 50% market share or the market consolidates, we're going to see massive attacks. In other words, if Microsoft Copilot becomes as dominant or it gets to the market penetration rate that Microsoft wanted to get to, then like everything else, it's going to be the criminal gangs very well worth their time to really single out attacking Copilot. Same with ChatGPT. It'll become a victim of its own success in that sense, as if it isn't already. Um, we're seeing a small number of threat actors beginning to bring it into their toolboxes. Like I said, there's a particular Chinese gang here who have made very good use of AI, particularly in text and images, and they're being singled out by the vendors as being quite an innovator in that space. As some of you may have heard, the Chinese have developed a AI platform called DeepSeek. Many people are feeling that it's a leap ahead of anything like ChatGPT or anything else, and it's using a fraction of the compute resources that ChatGPT or Copilot or anybody else needs at the back end. So the Chinese are innovative, not just at the legitimate level, but at the illegal level as well. There appears to be a very strong appetite for using AI there. Um, AI doesn't seem to be as hot a topic as we thought it might be. This is a Russian language forum and marketplace, for example. There was 150 posts less than that around GPTs or LLMs, whereas over 1,000 posts on cryptocurrency and over 600 threads on the access section where they're talking about getting in and out of networks and buying access to networks and all sorts of business issues. Um, Many threat actors appear to be focused on business as usual. They're really at experimentation phase, proof of concept phase, just like we are in terms of trying to figure out how to use AI that makes sense. Um, and one of the things that we're interested is that it's interesting to see is that they're sounding like a legitimate business in a crazy way, that they have their cash cow, they're doing what's always worked, what's always given them lots of money, and why bother change or innovate too much? Um, there are derivatives within cybercrime world. They're giving it their own names: Worm GPT, Fraud GPT. Um, they're advertised specifically for cybercrime, but then other people are saying, "Ah, that's just a jailbroken version of ChatGPT." And you would be amazed the amount of snobbery we're seeing in cybercrime world, in amongst the cybercriminals. Sophos X, back again, they only saw three new examples on the forums they researched of new platforms: Evil, Nano, and Hacker GPT. But the reason I want to show you those things is that they are trying to develop their own language learning models, their own AI platforms. They are trying to get into their own game. But like in the legitimate world, these are ending up becoming competing platforms. Now, here we have I'll fly through some of these interesting. This is just to give you an insight into the human side of cyber criminals. When we were looking at this, and the reason Sophos published it was because they were so surprised at the mundane human nature of some of the stuff that's going on. It was oddly comforting and reassuring in a weird way. We sometimes think of cyber criminals as absolute evil geniuses who sometimes seem to be always ahead of the game and are massively gifted. And when we look at this stuff, sometimes we're reminded that there's a very big community in here. Yes, some of them are gifted geniuses, and some of them are all too ordinary. And there's a wonderful amount of old-fashioned snobbery going on in there. So in this instance, we have a guy advertising his evil AI platform on a cybercrime forum, and he's literally trying to drive people into his. He's recommending it because you could save €1,400 for yourself. This forum, a threat actor is providing a link to it at the Hacker GPT site, just sharing it with his buddies. This is a great old forum if you want to use it. It can be used to
Great
generate
community.
secure code. Yeah, secure code and to train security teams on the right one. It's basically just ordinary stuff going on amongst criminals. Um, these forums we're seeing increasingly interested in using generative AI for spamming and scamming. So what they're doing is they're kind of swapping advice and best practice like a legitimate marketing organization would do. So for creating emails and spam SMS messages, and you see here the advice is how to properly prepare bulk HTML for bulk sending. And he's giving advice about writing beautiful letters, but if they leave lines in the template code that don't belong, and here he is giving practical advice, as in how to get your spam through. Um, this particular guy shares advice on using GPTs for sending bulk emails. Um, and then there's here the spamming, sorry, SMS with SIM, and he's giving you a few steps to follow, benefit of his experience, and how to, don't send to mixed carriers, send to particular carriers. So if you can see if one of them lands better, you can make a pattern. Again, very good marketing, A/B testing, sound stuff. It's just so incredible to see it being talked about from the other side. Don't use obvious domain names. Don't buy from Namecheap. Their domains die super quick. So, if the carrier sim you're spamming with has a client portal, here he is, again, using legitimate carriers to carry your spam without them realizing. A threat actor provides some tips, this one for SMS spamming, because it's still a huge segment, spamming via SMS to your phone. This guy is an advert for spamming service leader in ChatGPT using this blue pony tool. And again, he's sharing for free. He's claiming to be helping his mates out in Russian. This is all in Russian. But if you read his mail, it's actually quite lovely. And good day to all. We've decided not to hide in the shadows like ghouls anymore, but show ourselves to the world and come out of private to look into the public light. A completely free version of Blue Pony, and off you go. And it's just, there's our software version 1, and here's what it does. And it's great when you're targeting all those email domains. So as you can see, It's how he's been able to use a little bit of AI to help him, and he's sharing that with the world for the greater good of all the cybercriminal community. These guys are using AI to better target victims who speak other languages. So again, trying to overcome this big challenge that they guys have and give them more market coverage. The quality in this case of Russian translations using different systems. So um, yeah, you see where we're at. It's about trying to diversify, go after other markets, and improve the penetration rate of their spam. This guy is using AI for conducting open source intelligence. Again, he's saying they only used it once to save time, and then basically get into this thing where the poster didn't provide any further context, but he's I've been using neural networks for some time, and he says they cannot completely replace a person in the process of searching and analyzing information. The most they can do is prompt and help analyze information based on the data you enter into them. But you need to know how and what time to enter and double check everything. Just be an assistant that saves time. So they're having the exact same conversations about how to deploy AI as people in the legitimate business world are. Um, this girl are at proof of concept stage. Again, he's shared some code he's written with the help of ChatGPT. This guy here has shared legitimate research tools about this Red Reaper, a tool originally presented at RSA 2024. And again, they're thinking, how can we weaponize legitimate tools? Can we crack them? Can we break them? Can we use them for what we need to do? And as I've said to people many times, to remember that the criminal actors have access to the legitimate tools, figure them out, and figure out how to try and break them. A lot of this stuff's still aspirational. There's a guy here with posting his dream of what might be able to be and not do and all the rest of it, and then says, but this is just a product of my imagination for now. And his idea of doing video stuff with AI. This one here, how you can write a book with ChatGPT, just in case there's any literary and frustrated novelists in the cybercrime community. Um, yeah, fantastic. He's decided to share all of this. So honestly, it was quite a surprise some of this stuff as we saw the research coming back. Um, Non-security discussions they observed, particularly interesting was the thread who claimed to feel alone and lonely due to his profession. The poor devil. Just goes to show they're all out there and very, very strange. This man has spent 2 years talking to nobody except ChatGPT and is not feeling very well as a result of it. But it's out there on the public forums. This is what guys are talking about. So if you never felt sorry for a cyber criminal before, this goes to show they're human like everyone else. This one is a really funny one where they're accusing each other of using AI to generate poster code and kind of slagging each other for not being purists. So this guy wrote a big message entitled How AI Malware Works, and another guy responds to that, reckoning that most of that was all ChatGPT output. Embarrassing. And he's slagging him for cheating, and that's just really not the good thing to do. So the purists are sneering at AI. Um, and in this one, there's an awful lot of skepticism about it on the forums. The cyber criminals are still, an awful lot of them remain to be convinced that this is only good for anything other than improving your spam emails. And as you see here, it's happening a lot. Maybe in a few years' time it'll be much better, but it's suitable for automating shops, fake websites. It's good for scamming, but not for coding. See, coding is strictly big boy stuff, and they don't want the skill. So what you're seeing is we talk a lot in the legitimate world about AI replacing old skills. The criminals are just the same. They're afraid that old-fashioned, good, solid coding skills will be lost. This guy is an interesting one saying, I hear big companies say their AI products will stop attacks and reduce breaches. Some experts say AI could be used to discover new types of attacks. I'm curious which is going on. And they're having their own discussions down here, using the analogy, if they have a gun, you have a gun, everyone has to get one, this sort of stuff. So you can see the discussions. So to sum up, AI in cybercrime forums, it's only getting started. It's being used for the inverse marketing world, mass mailing, cleaning data, and as potentially social engineering attacks. They're likely to look at it from a point of view of get more done for less, helping to speed up monotonous work. But really, the mad, sexy kind of scary stuff we're all imagining hasn't really started. It's just about getting started. But that's not to say it's not going to get a lot bigger. But remember, the point of this is to show us where we are today, and it's looking back at data from the last year. So all we can do is be mindful. It is starting to get more sophisticated, but it's early days, and we're not seeing much evidence of that just now. So in its current state, it seems to be suited to these sort of tasks, but it's, yeah, more, as I said, they still to be adopting a wait and see approach, waiting for the technology to evolve. So now, very quick look at people in cloud environments. The last segment, and this is just look, cross scripting is the most impactful thing we're seeing in terms of attacks. SaaS platforms on the dark webs, it has been gone down somewhat in terms of how it's being discussed, but stealing cloud credentials to get into those are still the biggest thing. So we're seeing an increased use in cloud-based file hosting services such as Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive. They're using, like I said, legitimate platforms all the time and hiding in plain sight. There's an awful lot more of that going on because why bother hiding the dark web if you don't have to? Threat intelligence updates, 28% of cloud-related incidents involve the use of legitimate credentials. Again, stealing theft, stealing your information to get in is much easier than trying to do it the other way. Often a big issue we're discovering as a result of that. Now, this is particularly true of SaaS platforms. And we've had a few customers over the years ask us to do this testing of SaaS platforms, and they were very glad they did because what we were testing was this idea of users and privileges and how secure it is if you set a user up just to have a certain set of access privileges. What we're seeing is an awful lot of the time users have way more privileges than they need. They can see far more data than they should. And so when it's compromised, they didn't realize that this user or that category of user could see all that they could. And then it's too late. The business email compromise thing, I talked about this at the outset. Again, in cloud environments, it's even 39% of incidents. So that would reflect, I guess, the high prevalence of cloud-based email systems. Compliance failures harm security of cloud client environments. Absolutely. The number one failed security rule, if it's 100% only cloud environment, is incorrect settings in Linux systems. And I don't believe it. There I go again. Sorry about this. This is very strange. Outlook has
Liftable.
really done me a favor this morning by crashing twice. But don't worry, folks. That's just Microsoft and myself. I don't know why that happened. Sorry about that. Very strange. I'm here now. I think I can present from here. No, I'll start from the beginning.
Click
If
on
I just start
slideshow.
from here and just go from there. Yeah. Okay. And just there we go. Sorry about that, guys. Now then, the one strange thing that's been happening is the price of cloud access credentials. In other words, the data that they've stolen. There's so much of it out there, and although it's still very important and it's still very, very critical for them to steal, there's so much of it out there, the price is falling. Just a point of note I said I'd put in because it's just sort of interesting. Um, there's so much of it now. There's literally so competitive. There's so much data for sale that they're having to compete, which means that the price is falling.
Just saturated.
Yeah, it's an incredible thing, Jason, as we see it, that the cyber criminal world reflecting the economic issues that the legitimate world faces, whether that be competition amongst each other, innovation, staffing, recruitment, they're having their own security problems within each other. Who's using AI the smartest? Who's getting the biggest gains? It's remarkable how much is going on, just like the real world. Um, Here's an interesting one, and this is one of the main reasons I wanted to show this whole segment on cloud. This is mentioned, so this is cyber criminal chatter when they're sharing data, when they're sharing target information, when they're sharing how do they go about their business. Um, they're talking about Microsoft Outlook as by a mile, by far the biggest one. Here's your 2023 in purple, blue in 24. So you can see MS Outlook is by far and away the most considered, most attacked. This is the one they're putting all their time and energy into because it's the most dominant platform. And also bear in mind, it's anytime you see these stats, it is reflective of where they're getting a return for their time and their money. Just to put it in contrast, if you look at the very bottom, WordPress admin platform, or the WordPress admin user panel for so much of the world's websites built on WordPress, by far the majority. You saw in 23 the scale of the amount of mentions and thus the amount of attention that's getting. And then in 2024, look what it collapsed to. That's very, very interesting and an unbelievably dramatic change. Um, so that would show that something has changed significantly in how WordPress sites have been patched in the last year or so, because they've just moved on to a softer target, or there are areas where they're getting more return for their money. It's not worth their while to bother anymore, and hence they're seeing a lot less interest. If we come up this way again, just looking at Zoom, Autodesk, MongoDB, Dropbox. It's interesting to see how this breaks down overall. Moodle in the education sector, quite big here. Um, if you think about it compared to MS Active Directory or WebEx or Box or anything like that, but by a mile, Microsoft Outlook, the most chattered and talked about, and therefore the one that gets most attention for attacks. Um, Interesting one here is that yeah, it's nothing new that things like Dropbox and OneDrive have been used to distribute malicious software. It's just that it's getting much larger. It has really shown an increase. Now, here's another thing that's quite significant. Notable malware camps, these North Korean state-sponsored groups. Now, traditionally, the North Koreans were involved in state-to-state cyber espionage and that kind of more politically motivated stuff, or IP theft or what have you, and they have done a few successful bank heists. But now they have also got, I guess, they're starting to get more involved in general crime, if you like, for want of a better expression. So these two North Korean gangs have been using Dropbox, this one using Dropbox, this one using OneDrive, to distribute their malware, and it's going after normal cluster cloud services and legitimate businesses, and this is purely just old-fashioned revenue generation stuff. This is just for money. So we're seeing some state-sponsored action into kind of, if you like, basic cybercrime going after the mid-market, not just at the high end where they were before. So North Korea has quite a very sophisticated cybercrime skill pool within the country, sadly, if you look at it that way. Um, yeah, so the phishing again, the number one tactic. This is IBM's profile now, and this is about cloud environments. So we see it's even higher in terms of cloud environments. It's a successful tactic of choice to get into um, phishing. Phishing is the most successful by even a higher proportion than it is outside of the cloud. Using valid credentials, the second most successful initial infection vector. Um, Again, if we have your username and password, we'll just walk in rather than trying to break in. And over the past 2 years, 28% of incidents involve the use of legitimate credentials. So you see, it's a huge, huge issue. People stealing your data so that they can log on to your applications as you. Um, Now, last thing I want to look at is just exploiting vulnerabilities in public-facing applications. So this is a big one as well, keeping the need for why we have to have our multi-factor authentication, and we have to have policies, and we have to have every other type of restricted user access. We need to really think about what these SaaS applications allow people to do. Um, Public-facing applications are not invulnerable, and it's amazing how few people think to test public applications themselves before they just accept them at face value and use them. Most people don't. In DNA, we have done some testing before for one client in particular. A few years ago, we did 5 different SaaS tests, tested the number of applications, and we were glad we did. And so was the client, because they found several vulnerabilities that they were quite surprised to see. I think the development team who built the platform was also quite surprised as well. But either way, we were able to show them these things could be broken into quite easily if someone decided to put the time and attention into it. So it is something that we have to bear in mind. I think we're going to see an awful lot more of that awareness around SaaS platforms can't be considered to be robust and wonderful just because it's very few people really think about it. So top initial attack vectors again are phishing, spear phishing here, exploiting the public facing application, valid cloud accounts where you literally just walk in the door. You see brute force is still an issue, but the others are much more popular in terms of these are access vectors. And the IBM data here I'm talking about is global across the whole every region. So, cloud-hosted Active Directory is commonly used as a way to break in here and business email compromise attacks. 39% of incident response engagements over the past 2 years. So, number one active on, action on objective. And then frequently leveraging AIT and phishing attacks to bypass multi-factor authentication. I'm just going to show a little graphic here in a second to explain what this looks like. So in this scenario, the attackers use a proxy server to intercept the authentication process between the target and the legitimate service. It allows the attacker to collect the target's credentials and token, and then that makes the MFA basically being completely undermined. So they have your MFA token, they can break into your service and they can see what you're doing. They have effectively authenticated using the victim's credentials and can perform any access inside the application. So just in this instance, then they can get into your account basically anytime they want to, and it's legitimate because they're coming in from it looks like a legitimate authenticated device, and they can do what they want when they get in there. So, crypto mining, 22% of incidents over the past 2 years. This is something very few people ever think about and talk about. Basically, it's where in a cloud environment, if you're in a public cloud environment like Azure or AWS, your risk is that there's someone broke in there, piggy banking off it, and is crypto mining using your resources, using your CPU, using your RAM, using all your resources you're paying a fortune for. And you don't know it, and they're running a little crypto mining business on the slide beside you that you're not aware of, but you're paying for. Extremely resource intensive, powerful cloud infrastructure is a perfect location to deploy it because it just runs and you don't know about it, and you're less likely to notice of this when it's not running locally on your endpoint. So if someone is sitting in your environment or using resources on your machine, you're probably going to notice the drop in performance very obviously. But when it comes to big applications running in a public cloud environment, unless you have really good monitoring and software tools to monitor that, which DNA has now brought to the market as a solution as well with IBM, we've brought our new monitoring tools to the market to address this very issue. It's more for clients that are in that public cloud sector, but you absolutely do need to have something to watch that this hasn't happened. If there has been a breach that you didn't notice, and someone is sitting in here crypto mining at your expense. This is the one on credential harvesting that we mentioned a moment ago. And this little guide is just to show, look, it's the third most common action on objective. There's a bit of a technical walk into this here, but we won't worry about that right now. We'll delve into it deeper if anyone wants to chat about it at another time after this session. But basically, the idea is that here's the cycle. Our attacker sends this phishing email. It's reacted to. It mimics a legitimate portal login. In here, you are redirected to a proxy, which then steals your token as well as having your username and password, and then uses these credentials to authenticate and get into the real environment. Now, it's a bit more complex than this, but the point is that we have always preached that multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication is essential, and it is absolutely never going away, and it's brilliant. But the issue is that, like that, it has been attacked. There are ways they can get around it, and so we need to be mindful that it is not the be all and end all. And I wish it was, and people have, we have some clients who've thought that that's kind of it. And as I'm trying to say, we're always having to tell people the bad news that we have to keep evolving and we're not going to get rid of anything. So MFA isn't going anywhere, but we can't rely on it completely either, and we have to have other things to support it. And this is an ongoing issue all the time. So again, just looking at what was the actual point of all of this, email compromise, huge, crypto mining was huge. Um, so what are people doing? Actions and objectives means it's IBM language for what was the purpose of the attack? In 39% of cases, it was to business email compromise, break into your email. In 22% of the cases, crypto mining, which is much larger than certainly we were expecting to see. Account compromise, credential harvesting. It's hard to know where that differentiates in times from email compromise, but anyway, whatever way they broke up the data, they came down with that figure. server access, web shell malware, you see a data destruction, 6 cases, you see ransomware at the bottom. So in cloud environments, their real goal is to get at the live data, is to steal it, to get in and emulate your email so that you'll do something else. Um, and if it's an infrastructure solution, is to get in and start crypto mining. So to conclude then on this one, this is why when you look at the DNA security services suite that we always talk about, this has grown up over the years from being 2 or 3 points to what it is now. Um, it's has to be this, as you understand it, that this multi-layered approach is absolutely vital because of all the different attack vectors and all the different technologies and techniques that are used. Within these headings, there's going to be more technologies coming, and there are more details to be getting to. So, but that's the update from the overall threat intelligence point of view. Where does this leave us? Um, where do we go next? So DNA is talking to everybody at the moment, and as you know, we've always used this here, this NIST security framework as the gold standard kind of template for what we're going to build our services from. ISO 27001, which we live with ourselves, and Cyber Essentials, which we have been getting a lot of clients onto over the last couple of years. The next the next wave, if you like, is these two here, where the DORA Act, which is now live and operational within the EU for finance industry, and the NIS2 directive, which is for everybody else. Now, as I've said to people, our guiding principle for all cybersecurity going forward is the NIS2 directive, because that's what it's intended to do. The NIS2 directive is the biggest move the EU has made for cybersecurity for the general market ever. It's going to be very heavily enforced, and we have until the end of October to get everybody compliant and on board with it. Now, the good news is for most of our clients in DNA, we've been doing good cybersecurity with you for the last number of years, and we've invested in it, and you've done a lot of good stuff. So you're not far away anyway, but there is a few more bits to get done before we are fully NIS2 compliant, and we want to work with everybody this year to really make sure that you are NIS2 compliant. Now, key message I'm eager to get across here is that even if you are not strictly to the letter of the law within the initial scope of NIS2, as in, if you look up who's involved, and we're going to cover this now in our next slide. In our next deck, I want to just show you real quick, and Jason's going to work with me on this one. The what NIS2 is asking for. I'm just going to pause here for a tick and I load up the next deck. Bear with me 2 secs. That it's saying to people, look, here's an initial list of kind of customers and categories or businesses that have to be NIS2 compliant, if you like, straight out of the blocks from the get-go. Um, the catch is though that even if this isn't you right now, if you're doing business with anybody who is NIS2 who is NIS2 obliged, then you too have to be NIS2 obliged anyway. So you have to be compliant regardless. There's no way around it. Um, so if we look at it that way, everyone has to take NIS2 on board. So from DNA's perspective is NIS2 is the guiding principle behind our cybersecurity strategy. Whether to the letter of the law you need to think about it or not, because sooner or later it is going to be your compliance. And the overall idea behind it, if you like, what the EU are thinking here is NIS2 an industry legislation, a governance in the same way that other sectors have. So other sectors have things like the health and safety industry. If you look at things like health and safety legislation in construction, these are laws that are laid down for a long time. This is not open to negotiation or discussion or review. This is how it is. In other industries like manufacturing and various other things, there are simply rules and legislations that you must comply by, and that's that. So they're trying to bring the same thing in as a standard to cybersecurity, and we actually think it's a very good idea in the long run. So if you look at this now, Jason's going to join me more on this section here. So our zero trust architecture approach. So Jason, do you want to just walk through the zero trust concept first of all, what that is, and just
Yep,
I'll bring through some of the deck on this. So
perfect.
if you want to
Thanks,
just
Adrian.
explain.
Yep.
Yeah.
So as Adrian mentioned, we're taking guidance from industry leaders, NIST, NIST, so the National Institute of Standards and Technology, um, essentially worked with 24 vendors around the world, including those like IBM, Broadcom, Forescout, Google Cloud, and Microsoft, to come up with a framework to achieve zero trust architecture. So if we can go to the next slide, we're just going to have a look at the three key tenets of zero trust architecture. And those are never to trust implicitly. Even if a system or a user is behind a corporate firewall, we always require authentication. Next up is going to be leveraging role-based access. Sorry, the same slide there, yeah. Next would be leveraging the role-based access controls to make sure that we're adhering to that principle of least privilege, to provide granular permissions as required, and then lastly, to periodically authenticate both identities and devices to ensure continued compliance. So that compliance is really key throughout. Thanks. To the next one. If we were to consider zero trust architecture in a framework, or sorry, an onion type layered approach, the outermost would be the identity. Once upon a time, it was sufficient in a moat and castle architecture to have your security around the perimeter being really strong. But once someone was within that estate, they had free reign. That changed as we became more distributed and more remote. As we became more global in the way we operated, we now need to consider that identity as the new perimeter. So we need to look at things like MFA, so multi-factor authentication. We need to consider conditional access policies to make sure that those individuals or identities are compliant and have permission. Next up would be securing those endpoints, so no unrecognized devices can access the estate. Conditional access policies applied then to those devices, ensuring that they're secured and encrypted. The applications, one can only access company approved applications from approved devices and approved identities. The network should be secured with granular access controls and secure and encrypted tunneling. We also talk about segmentation being critical, keeping vulnerable applications on their own and splitting the network as much as possible. The data governance piece at the end, making sure that things like data loss prevention is provided, tagging and auditing of data, being able to track the data's passage through the business, making sure that that data can't leak outside of approved lanes. Thanks, Adrian. Next slide there. So with that zero trust architecture in mind and bringing NIS2 to the fore as that compliance standard, initially it was supposed to have been put into effect back in October of last year. That has been pushed forward to October this year. So it's really becoming critical that any applicable and supporting businesses act now to start preparing for that. Next slide there.
Yeah.
Right. So Adrian mentioned earlier about applicability. Effectively, we're looking at two levels of applicability. It's going to be high criticality sectors and then critical sectors. If your business deals with any of these, energy, digital, transport, we saw earlier how heavily hit by attacks the transport sector actually is. Look at the impact to the broader public in event of attack, and just where you sit in terms of that value chain or that supply chain. Just monitor that and understand how your applicability is affected here. Onto the next one would give us the critical sectors. There we're looking where a lot of our customers play as well, whether that be in the manufacturing or research, right? Okay, Adrian, on to the next one for applicability in general. Companies with 50 or
Mhm.
more staff, 10 million in revenue. However, the key thing here is anyone supplying or supporting any eligible entity. And that's almost all of us. We can go to the next. NIS2
Exactly,
provides,
Jason, and that's the
yep,
key point, Jason. Just is put make a point that we can't stress that enough. That I think this is a bit of a one that's under misunderstood. That the EU have slipped that one in very kind of, if you're dealing with any of those people, then you're also required. So that means who isn't dealing with someone in those categories, or who isn't dealing with
absolutely,
the banks or the public sector. It's
absolutely. We do not operate in vacuums. So NIS2 have set a number of organization or a number of requirements, and they've broken it down in the following way. So very topmost is that risk management, where we start looking at incident management, supply chain security, network security, improving things like your access controls and ensuring encryption. Next one. We have to improve our reporting. We have to have processes in place to report those incidents if and when they were to happen. The next slide will speak to us about corporate accountability. This becomes really, really important. Once upon a time, we could cherry pick what we wanted to or didn't want to apply for. There were certain situations where insurance would be the driver. Now legislation is becoming that driver. Just as with the health sector, standards are being put in place to protect people. This is very similar to that in that all of these risks are very, very real. And to drive that home, accountability is being driven to businesses that are applicable. In the next slide, ensuring that all of those services can be provided to the consumers or anyone within that supply chain. We need to be able to ensure that the system recovery, emergency procedures, and crises response, all of those crisis response teams are in place and well documented. NIS2 has provided 10 minimum measures for each of us to put into place. Once again, breaking those out, those risk assessments, evaluating current measures, employing encryption, having a look at those incident response teams, and making sure that there's a secure procurement process so that we're protected both upstream and downstream. We need to ensure that we are getting cybersecurity training so that all staff are aware of the risks and appropriate behaviors. We need to have effective procedures for users accessing critical data, and more people are given access to that information that could be used in an attack. It is best to have those well documented. There needs to be a plan for incident responses for both during and after breach. And then lastly, the use of multi-factor authentication, continuous authentication, and also the once again around the supply chains. And you'll see that that theme actually crops up more and more, how we have to consider ourselves in the bigger picture, how we impact those both up and downstream. And Adrian, that's really it. We can go to
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
last slide. This really speaks to,
Yeah,
shall we talk about
absolutely.
that
So
last one?
that's just absolutely like
Yeah,
so that's just a quick recap, guys, of this too. And like I said, what I want to do with all of you through your account manager, I'd like to and Jason to discuss with you is to get a snapshot. I mean, to call it a gap analysis, I don't want to overstate it, but to get a view at a high level of what the gap is between where we are today with you and what we need to do to complete a NIS2 level of accreditation and to have that compliance in place. So, like Jason has walked you through, that there's a few categories. We're already doing stuff here to a greater or lesser extent. For some people, it's just really a matter of having stronger policies, controls, and procedures and one or two extra little pieces of tooling in place. Um, we talked at a recent event we did about the Microsoft Business Premium offering and how what we liked about it was that it helps to unlock some tooling which can enable faster NIS2 compliance, or it addresses a lot of the stuff NIS2 is looking for,
Yeah,
and it can do it in a fairly cost-effective way. So, Jason, if you could just show the guys a very quick walk through this, and then we'll wrap the session at that, I think.
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Adrian. So once again, you'll see that this maps very closely to that zero trust architecture that was shown earlier, and the technologies available within the business premium um, subscription or license. From the identity side, that far left, identity being the new perimeter, multi-factor authentication, passwordless authentication, self-service password reset, conditional access, really helping to secure the identity wherever they may be working from. Next up would be that device management. Microsoft Intune is a really strong MDM tool for both things like workstations, laptops, and mobile devices, with support for both Microsoft Windows, Mac, and Linux, and Android. And then looking at the device security itself, so Microsoft Defender for Business included in that Business Premium SKU, providing really good protection. Linking that into Microsoft Defender for Office 365 on the Entra side of the thing for your email and identity security, and then following all that up with Microsoft Purview driving that data loss prevention to help classify, categorize, and manage the data within your estate. Thanks, Adrian. That's that for
Sure.
me.
Thanks, Jason. Excellent. Yep. So as you can see, guys, there's a lot there. If you like, under the one product set, it's a strong way of getting a lot of things done quickly, and we're definitely recommending everybody to have a good look at that. And there's a strong business case for it. Because, as I said, we really want a situation where as many of our clients as possible are very comfortable with NIS2 by the time we get to that October deadline. It's in everybody's interests. So. Yeah, that slide must be we have to update that one. It's October 25 now. But like I said, it is just one of those things that we're bringing to everybody's attention now. It is our new guidance. It doesn't mean that Cyber Essentials has gone away or we don't need it or we shouldn't have it. Absolutely. Cyber Essentials is still a fantastic standard to be at. But in truth, we've been waiting for the EU for a long time to put something in place as a guideline and to put some regulation in place. And the UK went ahead with Cyber Essentials independently of anything anyway, because they're no longer worried about what the EU are doing, so to speak. But we finally have the EU showing some leadership on it, so that's what we have to do, and it is going to be enforceable, and there is going to be penalties and corporate punishment. There's going to be teeth in this one. There are going to be significant fines. They've learned a lot, I think, from how they deployed GDPR. So if you have a data breach and you're found that you should have been NIS2 compliant and you weren't, and you haven't taken the reasonable steps you were supposed to have taken, they have already made it very clear and very public there will be significant fines. So look, we shouldn't be doing it under the threat of fines, but just be aware of that. That is a real danger. It is more for the fact that, as you can see, we're dealing with crime as an industry, crime as a service. It's not getting any easier. It's not going away. And there's always going to be something we have to keep investing on. So to set the expectation with every business leader or the board of directors and anyone who overall has the say in what happens in an organization from the financial point of view, they need to understand it's not set and forget, come back in 3 and 5 years, that it's not like traditional IT cycles were before. This is an ongoing thing. There's going to be some new investment every year in security for the foreseeable future. That's simply a reality we're all in. It's very important to everyone is that our business leaders are educated with that and be comfortable with that, because it's not like it used to be before. As some people thought, it's an investment I have to make, then I get to a new place, and now I'm okay, I can stop. And sadly, it's not really that simple. There is certainly a journey most of you have traveled, and it's not to say that you have to do the same leap again, but there's always going to be a little piece to be developed every year. And now at least we have a solid legal framework that everyone's going to understand. Okay, guys. So listen, if there's any questions, we'll check them. Otherwise, what I'd encourage you to do is follow up with your account manager separately after this, or come to myself or Jason offline, and we'll have a deep dive on any of this stuff in detail. But Otherwise, I don't think we have anything agreed. No. So listen, guys, thanks a million for that. I'll come back and chat to you again with Jason over the next while. I hope you found that useful. This video will be made available again, and I can show you if anyone wants to see the actual source decks, the source reports rather. Just let me know, and I'll share all that stuff with you as well if you'd like to have a further read for your own information.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so thanks everybody. Thanks a million. All the best. Cheers now.
Take care. Bye bye now.
Bye bye.